Hello everyone. Welcome to our channel. We tell horror stories meant to keep you awake at night. Let's begin. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more horror stories.
Alice's Dark Countdown. Alice first noticed the number on a Tuesday. It was written in the condensation on her bathroom mirror, traced in a childlike hand, 10. She frowned at her reflection, heart thumping. She lived alone. The apartment was old but secure. No pets, no roommates. She wiped the mirror with her sleeve, telling herself it was stress, too many late nights, too much caffeine. By the time she came home from work that evening, the number had returned, 9. This time it was scratched lightly into the fogged glass of her bedroom window. Alice laughed, sharp and nervous. "Very funny," she said to the empty room. "Maybe a prank? A neighbor? But how would anyone get inside without breaking anything?" She checked the locks, all intact. That night she dreamed of counting footsteps behind her, each step closer than the last. On Wednesday morning, 8 appeared on her phone screen, etched faintly across the black glass, visible only when the light hit it just right. She dropped the phone, breath hitching. She called her sister. "You're overtired," her sister said gently. "You always spiral when work gets bad." "I'm not imagining this," Alice snapped. "Something is counting down." "To what?" Alice didn't answer. She didn't know. At work, she couldn't focus. Every time she blinked, she thought she saw numbers floating in the air, dissolving before she could read them. When she finally looked at the security camera feed on her computer, something she had never done before, her blood ran cold. Behind her desk chair, reflected in the darkened screen, was 7, hovering where her shadow should be. She spun around. Nothing. By 6, Alice stopped trying to rationalize. The number appeared carved into the foam of her morning coffee, the milk swirling around it like a pale halo. The barista swore he hadn't done it. That night, Alice searched the internet until dawn. Countdown hallucinations, numbers haunting apartment, seeing numbers before death. The results were useless. Stress disorders, sleep paralysis, grief. Then she found a buried forum post from years ago. "If you see the countdown, do not try to stop it. Do not tell anyone the final number. When it reaches 0, it will be standing where your reflection should be." Alice slammed her laptop shut. Her reflection. She avoided mirrors after that. 5 appeared anyway. It was scratched into the back of her eyelids. She saw it every time she closed her eyes. Alice taped over every mirror in the apartment, bathroom, closet, even the reflective surface of her microwave. The apartment felt smaller, tighter, like it was holding its breath with her. She didn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., she heard breathing that wasn't hers, slow, patient, counting the seconds between each inhale. On Friday morning, Alice woke up to 4 written across the ceiling in dark, dripping strokes. She screamed. Her neighbor pounded on the wall, shouting for her to keep it down. When Alice begged him to come inside, to look, to see the number, he refused. "There's nothing there," he said through the door. "You need help." She slid down against the wall, shaking. When she looked back up, the ceiling was blank. Only the smell remained, cold, metallic, like old coins. 3 arrived with a memory. Alice was 7 again, standing in her childhood bathroom. Her mother was crying. The mirror was broken, shards glittering on the floor. Alice remembered counting backward out loud while her mother wrapped a towel around her bleeding arm. "Don't look," her mother had whispered. "Mirrors remember things." Alice had forgotten that. Until now. She tried to leave. As she dragged her suitcase down the hallway, the elevator doors slid open by themselves. Inside, scratched into the metal panel, was 2. The doors began to close. Alice ran. She barricaded herself in her apartment, heart hammering, lungs burning. She called emergency services, but the line filled with static. and, faintly, a voice counting in her own tone. 1, the voice whispered. The lights went out. In the darkness, Alice heard footsteps approach the bathroom. She smelled the cold metal scent again. Slowly, against her will, her head turned toward the mirror she had forgotten, the small one above the sink, hidden behind a hanging towel. The towel slipped. The mirror was uncovered. 0 was carved deep into the glass, and behind it, no, inside it, was Alice, but wrong. Her reflection smiled when she didn't. Its eyes were hollow, numbers spiraling deep where pupils should be. It pressed its hands against the glass from the other side. "You took my place, now I take yours." The mirror cracked. The neighbors reported hearing a scream that cut off too suddenly. When the police arrived, they found Alice's apartment empty. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, just one single mirror in the bathroom, clean, untouched, and, in the condensation slowly forming across its surface, a new number appeared.
Bloodlines of the unholy. The first thing Clara noticed was the blood. Not fresh, old, darkened to the color of rust, soaked deep into the wooden floorboards of her grandmother's house. The realtor hadn't mentioned it. The will hadn't either. Just, "The house is yours now. Take care of it." Clara stood in the entryway, suitcase still in her hand, listening to the house breathe. It had been 20 years since she'd last been here, since the night her mother fled with her in the rain, whispering prayers and refusing to look back. Clara remembered screaming, remembered her grandmother standing in the doorway, smiling as if nothing was wrong. The smell hadn't changed. Iron, wax, old smoke. She followed the blood trail into the living room, where faded religious symbols were carved into every surface, walls, furniture, even the ceiling beams. None of them matched any faith Clara recognized. They twisted and overlapped, etched so deeply the wood had split. At the center of the room was a long dining table, and beneath it, a circle carved into the floor. Clara swallowed. "Just a house," she whispered. "Just history." The lights flickered. That night, she dreamed of veins, not in bodies, in walls, pulsing beneath the plaster, carrying something warm and alive through the house. She woke with a scream, her nightgown damp with sweat, and something else. Blood. Thin lines ran down her arms, seeping from pores that hadn't been there before. In the bathroom mirror, her eyes looked darker, older. The house watched her. On the second day, Clara found the journal. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her grandmother's bedroom, wrapped in cloth stiff with dried blood. The handwriting inside was elegant, careful. "Our blood was chosen. It carries the covenant. Each generation must feed the house, or the house will feed itself." Clara flipped through page after page of names, women, all related, all followed by dates and causes of death scratched out, replaced with a single word, given. Her mother's name was there, but no date. That night, the whispers began. They came through the walls, through the pipes, through her own bones. "You are late," they murmured. "The blood is thin." At midnight, the basement door creaked open on its own. Clara tried to resist. She failed. The basement was larger than it should have been. Candles lined the walls, their flames already lit, dripping black wax onto the stone floor. At the center stood an altar, freshly cleaned. The circle from upstairs was carved again here, deeper, darker. A woman stood waiting, her grandmother. She looked exactly as Clara remembered her, unaged, smiling softly, hands folded in front of her. "You came back," she said. "You're dead," Clara whispered. Her grandmother chuckled. "I was given. There's a difference." She gestured to the altar. "Your mother broke the line, ran away, left us starving." The walls pulsed. "You were born anyway," her grandmother continued. "That means the blood remembers." Clara backed away. "I won't do this." The old woman's smile widened, stretching too far. "You are already." Pain exploded through Clara's veins. Symbols burned into her skin, appearing one by one, glowing beneath the flesh. Memories flooded her mind. Rituals, sacrifices, generations of women standing exactly where she stood now. The house needed her blood. Her grandmother pressed a blade into her hand. The metal hummed, alive. "One cut," she said. "Feed the covenant, or the house will choose another." Clara thought of her mother, running, bleeding, surviving. She dropped the blade. The basement screamed, walls cracked, candles flared. From the circle rose shadows shaped like women, their mouths open in silent agony. The blood in the floor began to move, crawling toward Clara like veins seeking a heart. Her grandmother shrieked, not in anger, but fear. "No, don't break it." Clara ran. She burst from the house just as it collapsed inward, wood and stone folding like flesh. The screams cut off abruptly. Silence. Weeks later, Clara sat in a hospital room, staring at her hands. The symbols were gone, but sometimes, when the lights flickered, she felt something move beneath her skin. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You cannot end a bloodline, only delay it." Clara looked at the ultrasound photo resting on the table beside her. The house was gone, but the blood remained.
Carnage on Main Street. Main Street used to be the safest place in town. That's what people said, anyway. Well-lit sidewalks, family diners open late, police station right on the corner. Nothing bad ever happened there. Until Friday night. Eli was closing up the gas station when the sirens started. At first, it was just one, distant, lazy. Then another, then so many they blurred together into a single rising howl that made his stomach tighten. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jacket. Main Street was packed. Cars idled at stoplights. People laughed outside bars. Neon signs buzzed overhead. Then the lights went out. Every streetlight, every storefront, gone in a single breath-stealing instant. The crowd murmured uneasily, and then the screaming began. It came from the far end of the street, sharp, wet, panicked. A man stumbled into view beneath the dead traffic light, clutching his throat. Blood poured through his fingers in thick, dark streams. He collapsed before anyone could reach him. Someone laughed. Eli froze. The laugh didn't sound human. Figures began stepping out of the darkness, too many to count. They moved wrong, jerked, twitched. Their bodies were smeared with blood that wasn't all theirs. Faces stretched into wide, trembling smiles. Then they charged. Panic detonated. People ran in every direction, tripping over each other, slamming into locked doors. Gunshots cracked through the chaos, flashes of light briefly revealing scenes Eli would never forget. Bodies torn open, shadows tearing into flesh, mouths pressed to screaming faces. Eli ducked behind a parked car as something slammed into it, denting the metal with inhuman strength. He peeked over the hood and locked eyes with one of them. It looked like a woman, or what used to be. Her jaw hung loose, teeth red and broken. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, yet fixed entirely on him. She whispered, "Main Street feeds us." Then she lunged. Eli ran. He sprinted toward the police station, lungs burning, shoes slipping in blood-slick pavement. The station doors were open, but inside was worse. Officers lay sprawled across the floor, bodies twisted unnaturally. The walls were painted in streaks of red. Something moved behind the front desk, chewing. Eli gagged and backed away. Outside, the carnage had spread. Cars burned, storefront windows shattered. The creatures, people, were everywhere now, tearing into anyone they caught, moving with a frenzied purpose. Above it all, Eli heard chanting, not voices, but the street itself. The asphalt vibrated beneath his feet. Cracks split open, oozing dark fluid that pulsed like veins. Main Street wasn't just the setting, it was alive. Eli ducked into an alley as a group of survivors huddled near a flickering diner sign. A woman sobbed quietly, clutching a blood-soaked child. A man muttered prayers that went unanswered. "What is this?" someone whispered. Before Eli could answer, the ground buckled. From the center of Main Street, something rose. A mass of limbs and faces fused together, screaming in unison. Street signs bent inward toward it. The remaining lights flickered back on, bathing the horror in a sickly yellow glow. The thing spoke, not with a mouth, but through every crack and surface. "You built me on blood," it said. "You fed me for decades. Now I collect." The creatures froze. Then, one by one, they turned toward the survivors. Eli grabbed the woman and child and ran as the diner exploded behind them. Fire tore through the street, swallowing screams whole. At the edge of town, the road suddenly ended, as if Main Street refused to let them leave. The asphalt rose like a wall. Eli turned back just in time to see the survivors dragged screaming into the dark. The last thing he saw was Main Street, perfectly restored, lights glowing, storefronts intact, clean, empty. The next morning, the town woke to silence. Authorities called it a gas explosion, a riot, an accident. But every night, at exactly midnight, Main Street hums softly, hungry.
Olive's lament, a specter's grief. They said the crying started after the funeral. Not loud sobs, never that. Olive Whitaker had never been a woman who made a scene. Even in life, she grieved quietly, folding sorrow into herself until it became part of her shape. In death, she did the same, only now the house listened. The Whitaker home stood alone at the end of Alder Road, its windows dark, its porch sagging under decades of weather and regret. People passed it quickly, avoiding the place where grief had learned how to echo. Evan Clark moved in because he needed somewhere cheap. He stayed because he didn't yet understand the sound. The first night, Evan woke to a soft noise, like fabric dragging gently across wood. He lay still, heart pounding, listening as the sound drifted through the hallway and faded. Not footsteps, something slower, something careful. He told himself it was the house settling. Old houses always mourn their age. The second night, he heard the crying. It came just before dawn, slipping into his dreams and pulling him awake. A woman's voice, thin and broken, humming between sobs as if trying to remember a melody she no longer had the strength to finish. Evan sat up. "Hello?" he called. The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt offended. The realtor hadn't mentioned Olive Whitaker. Evan learned her name from a neighbor, an elderly woman who watched the house with narrowed eyes. "She lost her boy," the woman said quietly. "War took him, then her husband, then the rest of her." "What happened to her?" Evan asked. The woman crossed herself. She stayed. Olive appeared in reflections first. Evan noticed her one night in the darkened television screen, just a shape behind his own face, a woman in an old dress, hair pinned loosely, head bowed in endless sorrow. He spun around, nothing, but the room smelled faintly of wilted flowers. The crying returned nightly after that. It seeped through walls, floors, Evan's chest. He dreamed of standing in the living room while Olive sat in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, rocking back and forth. Her mouth moved, no sound came out. He woke each time with tears on his face. The house began to change. Paint peeled faster. Cold settled into corners that sunlight never reached. Doors creaked open on their own, always leading Evan back to the living room, always to Olive's chair. One night he found it occupied. Olive Whitaker sat in the chair,
translucent and trembling, her form stitched together from memory and loss. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth open in a silent wail that shook the air. Evan couldn't move. "I didn't mean to bother you," he whispered. Her head lifted slowly. She looked straight through him. Then, at last, she spoke. "I never came home." The truth poured into Evan like cold water. Olive's son had died overseas. His body never returned. No grave, no closure. Olive had waited by the window every night until waiting became her only purpose. When she died in that chair, her grief stayed behind. It had nowhere else to go. "I hear you," Evan said softly. Olive's form shuddered. The house groaned. The crying changed, not quieter, but focused. The sound sharpened into words Evan barely understood. "Find him." Evan tried to leave the house. The door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't break. The house didn't want escape. It wanted completion. In the attic, Evan found the letters, dozens of them, unsent, addressed to Olive's son. They spoke of hope, of waiting, of belief that love could summon the dead. At the bottom of the box lay a single telegram, missing in action. No confirmation, no body, no ending. The crying reached its peak that night. The walls bled moisture. The floorboards warped. Olive appeared everywhere at once, at the staircase, in the hallway, in the corner of Evan's bedroom, her mouth stretched open in a grief that no longer remembered silence. "You must let him go," pleaded Evan. Olive's eyes locked onto his. "I can't," she whispered. Her lament rose into a scream that cracked mirrors and split the air like glass. The scream ended abruptly. The house fell silent. Olive stood before Evan, whole for the first time, solid, calm, exhausted. "I don't know how," she said. Evan swallowed. "By being heard." He sat with her until dawn. He listened. Morning light filtered through the windows. The house felt lighter. Olive faded slowly, her expression no longer twisted by grief, but softened by release. "Thank you," she whispered. The chair stood empty. Evan moved out a week later. The house remains, but no one hears the crying anymore. Only sometimes, late at night, neighbors swear they hear a soft hum drifting from the windows, a lullaby finally remembered, and they say the house doesn't feel lonely anymore.
7 minutes to madness. The first time it happened, Alice thought it was a glitch. Her phone lit up at 2:17 a.m., unlocking itself on the nightstand. No vibration, no sound, just a soft glow cutting through the dark bedroom. On the screen was a timer she hadn't set. 7 minutes. It began counting down. Alice squinted at it, half asleep. She checked the apps. Nothing was open. The timer wasn't attached to anything. No label, no alarm icon, no way to stop it. When she tapped the screen, her finger passed through the numbers like they weren't really there. At 0, the phone went black. Nothing else happened. She laughed it off the next morning. Phones bug out. Sleep deprivation does strange things to the brain. She told herself that explanation so many times it began to feel true. Then it happened again. The next night, same time, 2:17 a.m., 7 minutes. This time, Alice stayed awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, heart ticking in time with the numbers. When the timer hit 6, the air in the room felt heavier, like pressure building behind her ears. At 5, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall stretched unnaturally, warping into a low, distant groan. By 4, her reflection in the darkened TV screen blinked half a second after she did. Alice's breath caught. She waved a hand. The reflection followed, late. At 3, she heard her own voice whisper her name from the bathroom. She didn't answer. At 0,
Everything snapped back to normal. The sounds stopped. The room felt like a room again. Alice sat shaking until dawn. By the third night, she knew it wasn't a glitch. She tried everything, turning the phone off, leaving it in another room, draining the battery completely. At 2:17 a.m., the phone turned itself back on. 7 minutes. This time, the walls breathed, not visibly, subtly, the way shadows pulsed when she wasn't looking directly at them, the way distances felt wrong. The hallway to the bathroom stretched longer with each passing minute, like a bad dream refusing to end. At 5, Alice realized her thoughts were no longer private. "Don't panic," she thought. "Don't panic," a voice echoed softly from the kitchen. She clamped a hand over her mouth. At 4, memories surfaced that weren't hers. Hospital lights, screaming, hands gripping glass slick with blood. At 3, she remembered dying, not metaphorically, literally. She searched the internet the next morning, hands trembling. Buried in an abandoned forum thread, she found a phrase repeated by different usernames across years: 7 minutes to madness. One post explained it in fragments. The human mind can only tolerate 7 minutes of shared consciousness. After that, one identity fractures or makes room. Another warned, it doesn't matter which one breaks, only which one survives. On the 4th night, Alice tried to leave. At 2:10 a.m., she packed a bag and stepped into the hallway. The elevator doors stood open, waiting. Inside, the mirror panel reflected her perfectly, too perfectly. Her reflection smiled before she did. She took the stairs instead. At 2:17 a.m., the timer began anyway. 7 minutes. By 6, the stairwell twisted, steps repeating endlessly beneath her feet. By 5, doors appeared where none had been before. Bathrooms, bedrooms, mirrors lining every surface. Each reflection showed a version of Alice at a different moment of her life. At 4, one of them spoke. "You always run," it said. "That's why you're still here." At 3, Alice understood the truth. The timer wasn't a countdown to madness, it was a synchronization process. 7 minutes for something else to align with her thoughts, her memories, her mannerisms. 7 minutes to learn how to be her. On the 5th night, Alice stayed in her bathroom. She sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the mirror. She needed to see it happen, needed to know. 7 minutes. At 6, the reflection began breathing when she didn't. At 5, its eyes darkened, pupils stretching unnaturally wide. At 4, it began whispering memories she had never spoken aloud. At 3, the reflection pressed its hands to the glass from the inside. At 2, Alice felt herself thinning, thoughts slipping, emotions dulling, like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch inside her skull. At 1, the reflection leaned close. "You thank me. Do you know how hard it is to learn to be human in 7 minutes?" At 0, the glass cracked. The neighbors reported hearing a scream that cut off mid-syllable. In the morning, the apartment was quiet. Alice sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. The mirror above the sink reflected her perfectly. Her phone buzzed. A new timer appeared. 7 minutes. Alice smiled. Somewhere deep inside her mind, something else began to scream.
The Haunting of Grief Street. Grief Street was easy to miss. It didn't appear on most maps, tucked between newer developments and forgotten lots, its name half erased on rusted signs. People passed it every day without noticing, except those who had lost someone. Those people always noticed. Mara moved to Grief Street because it was cheap. The realtor hesitated when she said the address, then smiled too quickly. "It's quiet," he promised. "People don't stay long." Mara thought she understood why. She had buried her husband 6 months earlier. Quiet felt necessary. Silence was easier than sympathy. So she signed the lease. The houses on Grief Street leaned inward, as if listening to one another. Curtains were always drawn. Porches sat empty, rocking chairs unmoving even in the wind. At night, the streetlights flickered unevenly, casting long shadows that seemed to overlap where they shouldn't. Mara felt it the first night she slept there. The house wasn't empty, it was waiting. The whisper came just before dawn, not a voice, more like the shape of one, a soft pressure against her thoughts, forming something familiar. Mara. She jolted awake, heart racing, breath caught in her throat. The room was still, but her chest ached with the sudden, overwhelming certainty that she had almost heard her husband's voice. The dreams began after that. Each night, Mara dreamed of standing on Grief Street as it once was, bright, lively, full of people laughing and living. Children played on sidewalks, neighbors talked across fences, doors stood open. Then, slowly, the people faded, not vanished, thinned. Their smiles dulled, their movements slowed. One by one they stopped, clutching their chests, their faces, their throats, each loss different, each grief unique. Mara woke every morning with tears drying on her cheeks. She wasn't the only one. Mara noticed the others on Grief Street rarely looked at one another. When they did, their eyes held recognition and fear. An elderly man across the street sat on his porch every evening, staring at the empty space beside him. A woman down the block spoke softly to someone who never answered. They all carried grief like a second skin. Mara met Mrs. Calder while taking out the trash. "You lost someone," the woman said gently, not asking. Mara nodded. Mrs. Calder sighed. "That's how it starts." "What starts?" "The street," she replied. "It listens." The truth emerged slowly. Grief Street had been built decades ago after a factory collapse claimed dozens of lives. Families moved in to stay close to memories, to one another, to the place where loss had settled deepest. They mourned together, too long, too deeply, and the street learned. Mara began hearing footsteps at night, soft, familiar ones, padding down the hallway, stopping just outside her bedroom door. The air grew heavy when it happened, thick with longing. One night she spoke. "I miss you," she whispered into the dark. The footsteps moved closer. The door creaked. Her husband appeared first in reflections, in the microwave door, in darkened windows, in the bathroom mirror, standing just behind her. He looked almost right, features familiar, posture gentle, but his eyes were wrong, hollow, expectant. "You came here for me," he said softly. Mara shook her head, tears streaming. "I didn't know." His smile widened. The street fed on that. Each tear strengthened it. Each whispered memory gave shape to what lingered. Grief pooled beneath the asphalt, seeped into foundations, climbed walls like ivy. The dead were not resurrected. They were remembered too vividly to fade. Mara watched neighbors disappear, not abruptly, not violently. One day, a house would simply go quiet. Curtains never moved again. Lights burned endlessly until the power failed. The next morning, the house stood empty, except for the echo of someone who had loved too deeply to leave. Mrs. Calder explained it at last. "Grief Street doesn't kill," she said. "It keeps." "Why?" Mara asked. Mrs. Calder's eyes glistened. "Because grief hates being alone."
The street whispered constantly now. Names, memories, apologies never spoken, regrets sharpened by repetition. Mara felt herself thinning, her hunger fading, her sleep growing deeper, her memories blurring at the edges. Her husband appeared more solid each night. "You don't have to hurt anymore," he told her. "Stay." The final night came quietly. Mara stood in the middle of Grief Street, beneath flickering lights. The houses breathed around her, windows glowing faintly with trapped presences. She saw them then, dozens of figures standing just inside doorways, watching, waiting, all heartbroken, all bound. "I won't let this be my ending," Mara whispered. The street groaned. Her husband stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek, cold, familiar, aching. "If you leave, I disappear." Mara sobbed. Then she stepped backward. Dawn broke over Grief Street. For the first time in years, sunlight lingered. Mara walked away without looking back. Behind her, one house darkened completely. Grief Street still exists, but people say it's quieter now. Sometimes one house stands abandoned longer than the others, its windows shattered, its door open, as if something finally learned how to let go. But grief never forgets where it was heard, and if you ever walk down a street that seems to know your sorrow, turn back before it learns your name.
The last light in Milltown. Milltown wasn't on most maps anymore. Once it had been a factory town, loud with machines and voices, its nights glowing with street lamps and storefronts that stayed open late. But when the mills closed, people left in waves. Houses emptied, windows boarded up. One by one, the lights went out, until only one remained. Every night at exactly 9:11 p.m., a single street lamp at the edge of town flickered on. No one knew why. Evan noticed it the first night he drove through Milltown, rain streaking across his windshield as the road narrowed and the GPS lost signal. The town sign, "Welcome to Milltown," hung crooked, riddled with rust and bullet holes. Every building was dark, except the light. It stood at the far end of Main Street, glowing weakly, like a dying star. Evan slowed his car, unease crawling up his spine. The air felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Even the rain seemed to avoid the place, thinning into mist as he passed the first abandoned storefront. At 9:11, the light flickered, once, twice, then steadied. Evan drove on. He told himself it was nothing. The next night he was back. He didn't remember deciding to return. The road felt familiar, like muscle memory. His headlights swept over the same empty buildings, the same broken windows. Again, the town was completely dark. And again, at 9:11 p.m., the street lamp turned on. This time, Evan stopped the car. The light hummed faintly, buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. Beneath it stood something Evan hadn't noticed before. A person. They were facing away from him, standing perfectly still beneath the lamp's sickly glow. Too still. Evan rolled down his window. "Hey," he called. "You okay?" The figure didn't move. Evan stepped out of the car. The air was colder here, heavy with the smell of rust and damp concrete. As he approached, the figure slowly turned. It was a man, older than Evan, pale, eyes reflecting the light too brightly. His mouth stretched into a smile that didn't reach them. "You're late," the man said. Evan frowned. "Late for what?" The man tilted his head. "For keeping the light on." Before Evan could respond, the street lamp flickered violently and went out. Darkness swallowed the street. Evan stumbled back, heart pounding. When his eyes adjusted, the man was gone. The street lamp stood cold and dead. Evan ran back to his car and didn't stop driving until the sun came up. But Milltown followed him. He dreamed of it, empty streets, flickering bulbs, shadows standing just beyond the light. He woke every night at 9:11, heart racing, ears ringing with the hum of electricity. On the fourth night, his power went out. Every light in his house died at once, plunging him into darkness. Except one. Through his living room window, Evan saw it glowing across the street. A street lamp, identical to the one in Milltown. Beneath it stood the same man. "You can't let it go out," the man called softly. "Someone has to stay." Evan backed away, shaking. "I don't even live there." The man's smile widened. "You do now." The world flickered. Evan found himself standing in the middle of Milltown's main street. His car was gone. His phone showed no signal, only the time, 9:10 p.m. The street lamp loomed above him, dark. The man stood beside it, holding a switchbox, rusted and cracked. Milltown doesn't die. It just needs a light and someone to remember it. "What happens if it goes out?" Evan asked. The man looked past him, toward the empty streets. "Then everything it buried wakes up." The clock ticked over, 9:11 p.m. The man flipped the switch. The light came on. Pain exploded behind Evan's eyes, memories flooding in that weren't his, faces of people who had lived here, worked here, died here, all watching from the dark. The man pressed the switchbox into Evan's hands. "I'm tired," he whispered. "It's your turn." The light steadied. The man stepped back into the darkness and vanished. Evan screamed, but the sound didn't travel. Now, every night at 9:11 p.m., the last light in Milltown turns on, and beneath it stands a man who cannot leave, waiting.
The wails of screaming Jenny. Everyone in Fenmore knew the sound. It didn't matter if you were born there or only passing through. Once you heard it, you never forgot. A long, piercing wail that rose and fell like a living thing, echoing across the marshes at night. They called it Screaming Jenny, and they said if you heard her cry clearly, someone was about to die. The first time Thomas Reed heard the wail, it was distant. He had just arrived in Fenmore at dusk, tires crunching along the narrow road that cut through the wetlands. Fog clung low to the ground, swallowing fence posts and bending light into pale halos. Then the sound drifted in through his open window, a woman's scream. Not sharp, not sudden, but endless. Thomas slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. The sound faded slowly, dissolving into the croak of frogs and the whisper of reeds. "Probably a fox," he muttered. The locals would later laugh at that. Fenmore was the kind of town that didn't ask why you'd come. They simply watched. At the inn, the woman at the desk froze when Thomas mentioned the scream. "You heard it?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Thomas replied. "What was it?" Her mouth tightened. Best not talk about her too much. "Her?" She slid the room key across the counter. "Just don't follow the sound." The legend came to him anyway. It always did. Screaming Jenny, they said, had once been a woman who lived on the marsh's edge centuries ago. Some claimed she waited for a husband lost at sea. Others said she searched endlessly for a child taken by the bog. The details changed. The ending never did. Jenny screamed until her voice tore itself apart, and then she kept screaming anyway. The second night, the wail came closer. Thomas lay awake in the narrow inn bed as the sound rose through the fog, curling around the building like fingers. This time he could hear words inside the scream, not sentences, names. His chest tightened. He pressed his hands over his ears. The sound pushed through anyway. The following morning, the town bell rang.
A fisherman had been found drowned in the marsh, face frozen in terror, mouth open as if mid-scream. No one seemed surprised. They avoided Thomas's eyes. "You shouldn't be here," an old man told him at breakfast. "She doesn't like strangers." "Who is she?" Thomas demanded. The man sighed deeply. "She's the warning," he said, "and the punishment." Thomas tried to leave that afternoon. The road out of Fenmore disappeared into fog after only a mile, looping inexplicably back toward town. His phone lost signal, his GPS spun uselessly. At sunset, the wail began again, closer, clearer. Thomas felt it in his bones now, a vibration that rattled his teeth and squeezed his chest. The sound came from the marsh, from one place. Against every instinct, Thomas followed it. The fog thickened as he walked, wet and cold against his skin. The reeds parted reluctantly, revealing dark water that reflected nothing. At the center of the marsh stood a crooked wooden platform, half sunken into the mud, and on it, a woman. Screaming Jenny was not monstrous. That was the worst part. She looked painfully human, thin, pale, hair plastered to her face by damp air. Her mouth was open impossibly wide, throat stretched raw and bloodless as the sound poured out of her. Her eyes locked onto Thomas. The scream stopped. The silence was unbearable. "You hear me?" Jenny whispered. Her voice was ruined, ragged, hollow, scraped raw by centuries of grief. "I do," Thomas croaked. She smiled. "That means it's your turn." The truth poured into him. Jenny was bound to the marsh by betrayal, left behind, forgotten, sacrificed so others could survive. Her wail wasn't just warning, it was choosing. She screamed until someone listened closely enough to understand her pain. Then she passed it on. "I didn't do this to you," whispered Thomas. Jenny stepped closer. The water rippled outward from her bare feet. "No," she agreed, "but you heard me." Her hands, cold, trembling, pressed against his chest. "And now," she whispered, "you remember me." The scream tore out of Thomas, not from his mouth, from somewhere deeper. Pain, loss, terror, grief, everything he had buried ripped free in a single, endless wail that echoed across Fenmore. Jenny's form faded as the sound grew stronger. Her face softened. "Thank you," she breathed. At dawn, the town was silent. The marsh lay still. The innkeeper found Thomas standing on the old platform, eyes wide, mouth open, throat torn raw. No sound came from him. It came from the marsh now. They buried Thomas on the hill overlooking Fenmore, and that night the wail returned. Different, male, just as endless. The people of Fenmore locked their doors and prayed, because screaming Jenny was never just one woman. She was a role, and now someone else was screaming her name into the fog.
Whispers from the abyss. The ocean was silent in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, expectant. Dr. Elias Moran stood on the research platform's edge, staring down into the black water below. The lights from the rig barely scratched the surface, dissolving into darkness as if swallowed whole. They were deeper than any expedition had ever gone, and something was listening. The mission was simple on paper: record deep-sea acoustic anomalies detected miles beneath the surface, strange signals, rhythmic pulses that didn't match tectonic movement, marine life, or machinery. The funding proposal called it Unidentified Geophysical Resonance. The crew called it The Whisper. Elias didn't correct them. He'd heard it too. The first time came 3 days into the dive. Elias sat alone in the control room, headphones pressed tight against his ears as data streamed across the monitors. At first, it sounded like static, low, uneven,
almost comforting in its constancy. Then the static shifted. A pattern emerged, not a sound, a cadence. Elias leaned closer, breath shallow. The whisper slid into his awareness gently, like a thought that didn't belong to him. "You hear us." He tore the headphones off, heart hammering. The room was silent, but the words lingered. Sleep became impossible after that. When Elias closed his eyes, he saw vast darkness stretching endlessly in every direction. No stars, no light, just depth beyond comprehension. And beneath it all, voices, layered, countless, ancient, not screaming, inviting. The crew changed, small things at first. Missed responses, long pauses mid-conversation. One technician stood for hours staring at the ocean, lips moving silently as if responding to something only he could hear. When Elias asked what was wrong, the man smiled faintly. "It knows our names," he said. That night, the technician jumped. No one saw him fall. No one heard him hit the water. The whispers grew louder. The sensors picked up impossible harmonics now, frequencies that vibrated through bone rather than air. Equipment malfunctioned constantly, screens flickering with symbols that weren't part of any known language. Elias recorded everything. He shouldn't have. In the recordings, the whispers assembled themselves. Each playback revealed more structure, layers of sound folding into one another, forming meaning only when heard together. Elias understood then. The abyss wasn't speaking to them, it was speaking through them. The truth surfaced on the 6th night. Elias dreamed he stood at the ocean floor, unprotected, lungs full yet unburst. Before him stretched an endless chasm, its edges writhing with impossible geometry. Within it, something vast shifted, not a creature, a presence. "We have waited," it whispered. Elias woke screaming. The platform shook. The ocean beneath them churned violently, though no storm raged above. Waves slammed against steel supports as alarms screamed through the rig. The crew gathered in panic. "It's rising," someone sobbed. "The readings, there's movement." Elias stared at the monitor. The abyss was responding. To attention, he realized the terrible mistake too late. The whispers weren't accidental noise. They were echoes, fragments of something too large to surface all at once. Each mind that listened gave it shape. Each act of understanding pulled it closer. "You don't listen to it," Elias shouted. "You stop listening." But the crew didn't hear him. They were already listening. One by one, they answered. A woman pressed her hands to her ears, smiling through tears as she whispered secrets no one else could hear. Another laughed uncontrollably, claiming he finally understood the meaning of existence. The abyss fed on comprehension, on recognition, on minds that dared to know. Elias locked himself in the control room. He watched the depth readings spike impossibly fast. The abyss was no longer beneath him. It was reaching. The whispers filled the room now, vibrating through metal and flesh alike. "We remember you," they crooned. "You have always been ours." Elias made his choice. He rerouted the power, overloaded the sensors, burned the data. The monitors screamed as circuits fried, waveforms collapsing into static. The whispers faltered, screamed. The platform shook violently as the abyss recoiled. A sound rose from the depths, not heard, but felt, a vast, disappointed sigh rippling through the ocean itself. Then silence, true silence. Rescue arrived 2 days later. They found Elias alone on the platform, dehydrated, unresponsive, staring out at the water. The rest of the crew was gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty rooms and shattered equipment. Elias never spoke again, but doctors said he reacted violently to sound, especially low frequencies. He clawed at his ears, screamed at silence, whispered apologies to empty rooms. Sometimes, late at night, hospital staff heard him murmur the same phrase over and over. "It's still listening." The recordings were never recovered. Official reports blamed equipment failure, but deep beneath the ocean's surface, sensors still detect anomalies, faint pulses echoing upward through miles of black water, waiting for someone else to listen.
Whispers in 7 minutes. The whisper started at 2:17 a.m. At first, Mara thought it was the building settling, the old pipes groaning, the walls clicking as they cooled. She lay still in bed, eyes open, listening to the familiar nighttime noises she had learned to ignore since moving into the apartment. Then she heard her name, Mara. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent, it was close, too close. She sat up, heart thudding. The room was dark except for the faint glow of her phone on the nightstand. The screen was on. A timer stared back at her. 7 minutes. It began counting down. Mara frowned and picked up the phone. No app was open, no notifications. She tried to swipe it away, lock the screen, turn the phone off completely. Nothing worked. When the timer hit 6, the whisper came again, clearer this time. "You're awake." Mara swung her legs off the bed and stood, pulse roaring in her ears. The apartment looked normal. The door was locked, the windows closed. No one stood in the shadows. At 5 minutes, the whisper moved, not through the room, but through her head. "You always hear us faster than the others." Mara clutched her temples. "This isn't real," she whispered aloud. "I'm dreaming." At 4 minutes, the walls leaned in, not visibly, subtly. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been, stretching away from her like a tunnel. Her reflection in the dark TV screen blinked a moment too late. At 3 minutes, the whisper multiplied, voices layered over one another, murmuring too softly to understand, until she stopped trying not to listen. 7 minutes, they breathed. That's all it takes. At 0 minutes, the voices stopped. The apartment snapped back into place. The phone went dark. Silence returned like nothing had happened. Mara didn't sleep. The next morning, she searched the internet with shaking hands. Sleep disorders, auditory hallucinations, stress-induced psychosis. None of it felt right. Buried deep in an old discussion board, she found a thread titled "Whispers in 7 Minutes." Most posts were deleted. The ones that remained were fragmented, desperate. Don't answer them. Don't listen for patterns. They need your attention to align. Another post, time-stamped years ago, read, "If you hear whispers before the timer ends, it's already too late." That night, Mara tried to stay awake. At 2:17 a.m., the phone lit up anyway. 7 minutes. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, staring at the screen. At 6 minutes, the whisper came from behind her ear. "You're closer this time." At 5 minutes, she realized the voices weren't random. They were copying her thoughts. "Stop it," she thought. "Stop it," the voices echoed. At 4 minutes, memories surfaced that weren't hers. Kneeling on tile floors, staring into mirrors, listening to whispers while a timer ran out. Other apartments, other rooms, other lives. At 3 minutes, Mara understood. The whispers weren't driving her insane. They were rehearsing. At 2 minutes, her reflection in the hallway mirror leaned forward when she didn't. "You hear us because you've heard us before," it said softly. Mara shook her head. "No, I would remember." The reflection smiled. At 1 minute, the whisper was no longer many voices. It was one, her own. "You left us behind," it said. "Now it's your turn to listen." At 0 minutes, Mara screamed. The neighbors later reported hearing it, sharp, sudden,
and cut short. When morning came, Mara sat at her kitchen table, sipping cold coffee. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. The apartment was quiet. Her phone lay face up beside her. No timer. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection smiled back perfectly, too perfectly. At 2:17 a.m. the next night, somewhere else in the building, a different phone lit up. 7 minutes. A whisper followed.
Whispers of the cursed. The whispers began as a rumor. In the village of Black Hollow, people spoke of them quietly, never directly, never for long. They said the cursed were marked not by wounds or sickness, but by sound, a murmur that followed them, barely audible, like breath against the ear. If you listened too closely, the whispers learned your name. Mara didn't believe in curses. She came to Black Hollow for work, restoring old properties slated for sale. The pay was good, the town was isolated, perfect for starting over. Her first assignment was a stone house at the forest's edge, abandoned for decades, windows boarded, doors sealed with rusted chains. No one's lived there since the Harrow family, the mayor said, avoiding her eyes. They were unfortunate. Mara unlocked the door anyway. The house smelled of damp stone and old wood. Dust lay thick across the floors, untouched except for a single trail of footprints leading deeper inside. Fresh. Mara frowned. Hello? The sound didn't echo. It was swallowed. The first whisper came that night. Mara lay half asleep in her rented room above the tavern when she heard it, soft, fragmented, like several voices speaking at once through a wall. She sat up. Help us. The words dissolved before she could be sure they were real. Downstairs, the tavern was silent. The next day, she explored the house again. Scratched symbols marked the stone walls, circles broken by jagged lines, repeated over and over. In the basement, she found names carved into the support beams, dozens of them, some crossed out, some not. At the bottom, freshly etched, was a name she didn't recognize yet. The whispers followed her after that, in the creak of floorboards, in the rustle of leaves, in the space just behind her thoughts. They never spoke clearly, only fragments. Bound, never alone, pass it on. Mara told herself it was stress. She told herself a lot of things. She met one of the cursed on her third day. An old woman sat alone at the edge of the village, rocking slowly on her porch. Her eyes were unfocused, her lips moving constantly. Mara hesitated, then approached. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The woman stopped rocking. She leaned forward. "They're loud today," she whispered. Mara felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Who is?" The woman smiled, revealing teeth worn almost smooth. "You'll hear them soon enough." That night, Mara dreamed of mouths, hundreds of them opening and closing in the dark, whispering secrets she didn't want to know, names, regrets, promises broken, and blood debts unpaid. When she woke, her throat ached, as if she'd been whispering too. The truth emerged slowly, dragged from reluctant villagers and half-burned records in the town hall. Black Hollow had once been a place of refuge. During a famine generations ago, a group of villagers sealed themselves inside the stone house, performing a ritual meant to save them. It worked. They survived. But survival demanded payment. The curse had no single bearer. It required many. The whispers were the curse, a collective burden of guilt, fear, and betrayal, pressed into sound and passed on whenever someone listened too long. The cursed didn't die easily. They faded, left hollow. Mara noticed the change in herself. Her thoughts felt crowded. Her reflection lingered half a second too long. Sometimes she caught herself whispering answers to questions no one had asked. At the stone house, the footprints multiplied, all hers, all overlapping.
She tried to leave. The road out of Black Hollow twisted impossibly, looping back no matter how long she drove. Her phone lost signal, the radio filled with static, and beneath it, voices, clearer now. "You hear us. Don't let us fade." Mara screamed. The whispers screamed back. The final night came quietly. Mara stood in the basement of the stone house, surrounded by carved names glowing faintly in the dark. The air vibrated with murmurs, voices layering into a single overwhelming presence. "We carried it," the whispers said. "Now you will." "I won't," Mara sobbed. The shadows deepened. "You already are." She understood then. The curse didn't force itself. It waited for listeners, for people who came alone, for those with enough silence inside them to make room. At dawn, the villagers found Mara sitting on the porch of the stone house, rocking gently. Her eyes stared into nothing, lips moving soundlessly. They didn't approach, they knew better. Another name appeared on the basement wall that day, freshly carved. Black Hollow remains. Travelers pass through, sometimes pausing when they hear something odd in the wind, soft murmurs, almost words. Most keep walking. Those who stop to listen rarely leave, because curses don't need monsters, they only need voices.